John, how you doing?
I'm good, man. How are you?
It's been a long time. Like we were just saying, you were like my fifth episode, and so hopefully I don't sound as ridiculous as I did back
then. You still sound like the guy from Fargo, though.
Oh, come on.
Minnesota in you. You can't take Minnesota.
I don't know if you've watched that show, but hopefully it's not as ridiculous. There's no like dead bodies in my background or my backyard or anything.
I'm just crapping on you.
We got to say you say about or something.
Yeah. Okay, we can have like a duel over who has the stupidest accent.
All right. So I'm excited to have you back on the show. The listeners who have been caught up over the last couple episodes, we literally teed you up perfectly to plug in all the ridiculous amount of wisdom that you've got on the value drivers and the company you've built, but for anybody that might not be familiar with your story at this point, just kind of give us a little bit of background of what, your experience selling your businesses, and then a little bit of how about your book and why you ended up writing it before we go into the 8 key drivers.
Yeah, I started starting businesses. I've had 4 now, exited them, and have learned lots along the way, lots of mistakes, and maybe a few lessons. I tried to codify some of those in a book I wrote a while ago called Built to Sell. And then out of the book actually came the company Value Builder. So we now have worked with 40,000 businesses to help them improve the value of their company. It's our view that today when business owners go to sell their company, they're being taken advantage of. I just did a podcast actually with a guy who sold his software company for 3.5 times profit, and it struck me as a low multiple for a software company, right? But
for a software company, no kidding. Usually, I thought you were going to say revenue.
yeah. But it's his first time through, and admittedly, he just didn't know really all the ins and outs. And so that's what we try to do at Value Builder. We try to basically work with business owners who are thinking about exiting, and get them to think about their business through the eyes of an acquirer, so that they can jack up their valuation multiple. I mean, people who start with us on average are getting 3.5. The best performers are the people we have on our system that have a Value Builder score of 90 or more. They're getting offers of 7.1, so more than double the average. So that's kind of what I do.
That's awesome, and we're gonna peel back all that because we over the last couple episodes we were talking about EBITDA. What the heck is that? Cash flow, multiples, all this kind of stuff, and just even a little bit of context, John. This is so fun because I remember, and I think you actually ended up redoing your first podcast intro because you're I think maybe a half a year above me, and I remember when I started my show, I'm like, you and I were sitting when I was getting certified. I'm like, I don't know what the heck I'm going to talk about. I want it to be different than yours because you've got this regimen of interviewing only owners. So I've kind of been finding my way. But I remember literally I was listening to your first episode like 3 years ago or 2, whatever it was, 2.5. And I was cleaning, and it was your episode of I couldn't believe what happened and why there's no one really solving this problem about growing value, understanding how to tie it to the X, all this stuff. And I was like, I know what I want to be doing. and then then I went up and got certified, and you talked about this Value Builder score, and then we can kind of dive into the 8 key drivers, because I think the big takeaway we've been talking about the last few episodes, transferable value. You know what I mean? How easily can you transfer your cash flow? And why don't you explain the survey and the how you're actually calculating this? Because I think we got into a lot of technical stuff, and you've done a really good job with your book and explaining, what that really means. But then also this survey, that it's not, 3 years of financials and, diving into this full, cavity search. You did a really good job. So can you explain a little bit about that, the 40,000 people, and what the scores mean and how that ties to the 3 and the 7 that you're talking about?
Yeah, for sure. So the questionnaire, it takes about 15 minutes to complete, by the way, and it basically walks through the company and asks a bunch of questions that an acquirer would ask. So the common theme across all 15 minutes worth of questions is really, how well would your company operate without you? And if the answer to that is not very well, then your multiple is going to be very low or non-existent. In other words, you may not have a sellable company. If your business would hum along really nicely without you, in other words, you could take a 3-month vacation, then you're likely to be paid quite a bit better multiple. Because it's basic, right? So if you think about it, when you come into a business, if you're buying it, you want to know that it's going to thrive without the owner. And so there's these 8 factors that acquirers look for. So for example, one of them would be recurring revenue. The view that recurring revenue is something that's going to happen with or without the owner, being the rainmaker for the company. And so if you've got recurring revenue, that's going to boost your value. If too much of your customer relationships are in the hands of the owner, meaning the owner is the person that customers kind of care about, then that's going to discount your value. And so we've got a whole series of questions. Again, there's these 8 factors, but really, if you wanted to know what the common denominator is, it's could your business thrive without you personally running it every day?
Well, and what I find interesting is you got so much. 40,000 people that are taking, that's a lot. You get to the law of large numbers, so that's a lot of data. And so, what do you mean when you're saying that? The people, the correlation between the 3 and the 7, and then how do you track that? And like, can you kind of explain that for the listeners?
Oh yeah, sure. So one of the questions we ask on the questionnaire is, well, first of all, we ask about your profitability. Then we ask about whether or not you've received an offer to buy your business in the last 12 months, a written offer to buy your business, like a serious offer to buy your business.
Mm-hmm.
And if so, what multiple of your pre-tax profit was the offer? And we just have done the analysis and looked at all 40,000 of our users, and we've discovered that when they go through the complete the value bidder questionnaire, the average score, by the way, at about 100 is 59. Is 59. So the average performer gets a 59, and that average business, when we just look statistically at what multiple they've been offered, it's 3.5 times their pre-tax profit. And then when we analyze and we take this one cohort of business owners who have achieved a very high score, so this would be 90 out of a possible 100, 90 or better, and we look at the multiples they've been offered, on average they are 7.1 times pre-tax profit. So that's basically the math behind it.
Well, got it. Which makes a lot of sense then, because and that's any kind of industry, any kind of sector. I mean, is there any size companies that you're looking at? Because the ranges, you have to get to these averages, right? Because all of these things are different. But is there size companies or any kind of benchmarks that you've got?
Sure. Yeah. So our typical user would be a business owner, would be between 1 and 20 million in annual revenue, and they're owner operated companies. The owner knows everything there is to know about making a widget, but they're probably not experts on selling companies. So this is for the first time, it's new to them. I think one of the biggest misconceptions, one of the biggest areas we rail against a lot is the idea that businesses are valued based on your industry. And you hear this all the time. You hear, I'm an HVAC guy, so I'm going to get 4 times EBITDA, or I'm a SaaS software company, and therefore I'm going to get 3 times revenue. And what we find is that the reality is very different. We see that companies, while industry is important, it is certainly not you're certainly not predestined to get whatever valuation benchmark there is in your industry. I'll give you an example. Ruby Receptionist is a cool company. Have you ever interviewed Jill Nelson?
I have not.
Oh, you should get her on the show. She is a cool lady. So I think she's based in Seattle or Portland, Oregon. She's out Pacific Northwest. Anyway, so Jill, she runs this company called Ruby Receptionist, and it couldn't be more analog, more 1980s. It's an answering service, right? So you call in, and you're
they have typewriters.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're a lawyer and you want someone to answer the phone. You're a solo practitioner, so you hire a Ruby Receptionist. They answer the phone. Hi, Bob's, legal services. And so she built the business up to $11 million in total revenue.
Oh my gosh!
So we've looked at industry verticals and looked at what the multiple would be in the administrative support vertical, which is the vertical she finds herself in, and it would be roughly 1.9 times EBITDA. So a very low multiple, right? Mm-hmm. And so Jill, she's got $11 million in revenue. She wouldn't tell me what her profitability is, but let's say she's making 10 points. It'd be hard pressed to imagine
10%, right?
Yeah, let's imagine she's making 10%. So $1.1 million profitability. So if she's looking to get 2 times $1.1 million, well, that's about $2 million and change, right, for her company. She sells her business recently for $38.8 million. It's like it's such an outlandish multiple. It's almost unbelievable. But she did really well on one of the 8 key drivers of company value, this thing called monopoly control. So she nailed it on one of the drivers. And so I tell that story to you largely because you're not predetermined to get whatever your industry average multiple. I think you do yourself a huge disservice by saying, well, because I'm in XYZ industry, I'm going to get X multiple.
Well, you first of all, I love it because I always like you. I think you and I have talked in the past, but it's like your company's worth what someone's willing to pay for it, right? So
Right.
there's benchmarks, and I was actually diving into Brandon Hall, who's the certified valuations, or like, and he even agreed. I mean, he's done 135 of these, and the reality is like that's part of the comps and how they get to this valuation. And I'm like, well, it's all kind of BS until someone buys your company.
Right, right. And I love it when valuation guys get really like kind of like the leather patch on the elbow and the pipe and the kind of glasses that peer over, and they get really serious and scientific about valuation. And while I don't mean to discredit valuation, clearly it's a very sophisticated and very important service, but at the same time, it is subjective. There is as you say, the true value of a business is what someone's willing to pay for it. Now, when you're getting into divorce or you've got a partnership dispute
Or estate planning or whatever.
yeah, and somebody's actually got to put a number on it, then clearly you need a formal valuation. You need to pay like probably tens of thousands of dollars for that if you've got a decent sized company, and it's going to get to you pretty close to the number.
Mm-hmm.
But there, you and I both have done interviews with people that the number, they'll get 2x the number, or they'll get 50% of the number.
And it depends on, well, and I think it also ties to like, this is where, your methodology and then the exit planning, you tie those two together because it all depends on what route you're going to transfer your company to, right? I mean, whether it's estate planning or family transfer or private, I mean, all that depends. Totally depends. And so, John, let's maybe dive into the 8 key drivers in the transfer, because I think what, out of the last two and a lot of the people that you and I interview, I think you probably can pinpoint, like you said, that she did really good at monopoly control. But like, maybe, I don't know if you want to go over all 8 of them quick, and then we can dive into a couple of your favorite ones, because let's get the owners and the listeners to be able to have some takeaways, like, because like before they're like, okay, great, well, I understand this, but what can I do about it?
Sure. Yeah. So the 8 in no particular order are your financial performance. So how much revenue, profitability does your company generate? So that's basic blocking and tackling stuff, right? Number 2 is growth potential. So how much growth are you going to generate from your business in the future? Buyers are looking for the future. They're not buying the past, right? So they want to know what the growth potential of the business is. Customer score is how satisfied your customers are. So overall satisfaction level with your customers is going to be important. Recurring revenue is a 4th. And again, I think I shared with you the reason for that. Monopoly control is how well differentiated your product and services is. The reason Jill Nelson, by the way, got some outlandish multiple is she had developed, as part of her answering service, a routing software, so that when a call came in, she dispatched the call to the available attendant. She had a network of these receptionists all across the country. And it was the routing software that she built that gave her point of differentiation. And the reason for that is because every other receptionist company, when the receptionist got busy, the person calling would get an answering machine. And that's exactly what they wanted to avoid, the customer wanted to avoid. So what Jill did through the routing software was got the phone call, the customer's phone call, to the right person. Well, that had applicability to a variety of different industries, which is what made her business unique and what got her at such a great multiple.
Who bought her, by the way? Was it like private equity, or is it?
It was a private equity company that saw a way to monetize her software in various other industries. Hub and spoke is another driver of company value. It basically is how dependent the company is on you, the owner. The Switzerland structure gets its name from the country of Switzerland that honors independence. It's almost fascinated by and obsessed with independence. And so Switzerland structure measures your business's dependence on any one customer, employee, or supplier. And the valuation teeter-totter is how cash flow moves through your business. The more cash your company generates, the more valuable it is to a buyer, because they don't have to inject working capital into your business. So again, I'm going fast here, but those are the 8.
Well, no, I'll be on the show notes, and then we'll have a link to where they can take the survey and stuff. Perfect. Too. And what I want to know, John, is like, when you look at these different 8 key drivers, and I've had customers that have gone through this, and then you have all these different owners in different industries, different journeys where they're at in their life stage of the business. How do you prioritize with what you should be doing, whether it's because you've only got so much time and so much capital how do you determine, like, okay, there's 8 different things. Where's my biggest bang for my buck? How am I mitigating my risk the most? I mean, is there any way that you've seen people, take these and prioritize them?
Yeah, so you're going to get, I'm glad you're going to put the link in the show notes because people can go to the show notes, take the questionnaire. When you get your results back, you're going to see your score on these 8 key drivers out of 100. And I think the answer is start with the ones that you're performing the lowest. I don't mean to distill it down to its basic terms, but when a buyer looks at your business, they're looking for hair on the deal. That's how buyers talk about when there's a problem, right? And
Hmm.
so if you can avoid any major hair on the deal, any major problems, that's at least going to get you through the diligence process and get you, I think, a fair multiple. If you can get one or two of the drivers to outperform, well, that's great. But if I had to pick whether I should accentuate one driver or fix the ones that are really underperforming, I'd fix the underperformers. It's like you've heard in job interviews, like personal coaches say, accentuate your strengths. Don't worry about your shortcomings. And I think that's BS. I mean, so when it comes to the value of your company, I think if you've got shortcomings in your business, you can have all the strengths in the world, but if you don't shore up those problem areas, you're not going to get a deal done. And the only deal you're going to get done is some crappy earnout shenanigans where you're going to be working for some company for 5 years. So I think shore up your lowest performing drivers, and then certainly accentuate the ones you score highest on. But don't disregard if you've got a low score below 50 on any one of the 8 drivers, I would start there.
So perfect way to answer that. And then I want to go back to diving into a couple of these because I've got a couple of them that I want to expand because I know you got some serious experience in the recurring revenue because your automatic customer book and some other ones. But to expand on the earnout and the multiple and the cash upfront, first of all, I know you've got, I don't know if it was an article or a podcast you did, earnout, burnout, or whatever it was. So you give my listeners your definition of an earnout, and then how does that, the money up front or an earnout, does that correlate with these drivers and the multiple as well?
Yeah. So first of all, definition. So basically, an earnout is used when an owner, a buyer, and seller can't really make a deal. There's too much of a gap in valuation, and so the buyer says, "Okay, I'll buy your business, and part of the consideration will be contingent on you hitting certain goals in the future." And so oftentimes it's linked to EBITDA of your company as a division of theirs. If you're going to integrate the two companies really quickly, it could be revenue of your product line, it could be retention of a single client, et cetera. But there's usually some goals that you've got to hit. The earnout, you should know, is at risk, meaning it's not guaranteed, and it's far from guaranteed, in fact, because you as the seller become a middle manager in a big company most likely, or a division leader of a private equity roll up, and in that context you may not have control over some of the things you need to hit your number, your budgets, your market segment, etc. And so it's very much at risk. A lot of entrepreneurs leave before the end of the earnout just because they can't handle working for a big company, etc.
Well, and on just a small story in that, I talked to someone recently where they like, I think they like took the average of both companies' profitability because this is totally like a bootstrap deal. And then they say, oh, well, we both do this. Well, let's just say we can do 5%. And then, by the way, you're not in charge of your budget anymore. And so like they go like, well, we bought dump trucks this quarter. And like next thing you know, you don't get your couple $100,000.
Yeah. It's a big deal. And, I think it strikes to the heart of why is a buyer buying this company? Is the buyer buying the company to integrate it into their business? If the answer to that is yes, and more often than not, the answer to that is yes, then the earnout is often going to be at loggerheads. Hitting your earnout, you're often be at loggerheads with the goal of integration. So if your goal is to hit a profitability, you probably would run independently. Give me all the budget you can and let me run this thing independently. I'll hit the earnout.
Mm-hmm.
If the goal is to integrate, you might want to have the buying company salespeople do the selling. So you as the founder might want to train the buying company salespeople, right? But if your goal is to hit a short-term number, you're not going to waste your time training their salespeople on how to sell your product. You're going to just go after hitting your number. So again, I think earnouts are an imperfect tool used oftentimes, in particular with service businesses, but used to bridge the gap between what a seller wants to sell their company for and what a buyer is willing to pay for it. It's different than a vendor takeback. You've heard vendor takebacks, or when an owner is asked to finance part of the deal.
Mm-hmm.
Those are usually used when a business is quite small And the buyer, oftentimes an individual, doesn't have the money to buy the business outright. So they'll borrow essentially from
This is
the
like a
owner.
contract for deed. Yeah.
Yeah, a portion of of the of the price, if you will, is paid over time. And oftentimes the SBA gets involved in lending to the buyer, and the seller gets their money over time, or a portion of their money over time. That's different than earnout. Earnout is at risk, and it's contingent on hitting goals in the future in most cases.
So, with these people that are getting, the high scores on the AQ drivers, are you seeing, and I don't know if you track this at all, where they get more of their money up front?
Yeah, we don't, but we know anecdotally. We don't track it quantitatively, but we know anecdotally and through the radio, the podcast, that a lot of business owners are getting much better multiples and much better deal terms when they have a high value builder score. When you think about value builder score, just if you've got a high value builder score, you're in control. You're in control of the process. You can decide to sell or not. And if you do decide to sell, you've got much better leverage because your business is not dependent on you. So, they want to do a deal where 70% of the value is based on you hitting future. It's hard to believe that deals would be that heavily weighted to earnouts,
Mm-hmm.
but I've seen them.
Mm-hmm.
But if you get that deal, you just basically say no. There's 4 other companies that want to buy this business, and I expect 100% upfront, or I expect 80% upfront, or something to that effect. So it just gives you better deal terms. It gives you better, less on the earnout, more cash up front, less likely to be financed, better terms, better employment terms for you as the owner. Because don't forget, when you sell, you're likely to have to be an employee for theirs for a while. So yeah, it just gives you more leverage.
So then to move into a couple of the key drivers to give a little bit of meat behind them, I want to get into recurring revenue because I think that's one that everybody wants, and it's a lot. There's a lot of juice behind it. But before we get into that one, I really actually like. It's the financial reporting and the financial performance. That's a lot of some of these are fairly straightforward. But I think the one that the cash flow teeter totter. Can you explain that one before we get into the recurring revenue? Because I think there's some very actionable stuff that people can do that they don't really understand how important it is, and how asking some hard questions with their clients or their vendors actually could impact the value of their business. So why don't you dive into that one?
Yeah, sure. So essentially, when you go to sell your company, a buyer is going to look at it, and they're essentially going to ask the question, how much working capital are we going to have to inject in this company in order to operate it the moment we take over the business? And working capital is essentially, if you remember back to kind of economics class, grade 12 economics, it's the money your company needs to meet its immediate obligations, right? So basically the money in the bank that you need the day you hand over the keys to the other guys.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of entrepreneurs think, well, I've got $600,000 or $700,000 in retained earnings. That's sitting there, rainy day fund. That's my money. I've earned that money. When I sell my business, I'm going to strip that out. And a lot of buyers say, no, that's money you've got in the company to run the business, to pay your employees, to pay for all of your immediate expenses. So that money stays. And it's often an area where a deal breaks down, especially if the owner has been running the business for decades and they take the view that working capital or their retained earnings are theirs to keep. And so one big takeaway from a negotiation standpoint is make sure if you're going to agree to a letter of intent with a buyer, that you clear up what the working capital calculation is going to be at closing, what your expectations are and what their expectations are, because it can change the value of the deal by certainly 6 figures, can be 7 or more, depending on how much retained earnings. So that's a little bit off topic, but retained earnings and or working capital is key. So when a buyer comes in, they're going to look and say, okay, we need X amount of money in the company to run this business going forward. If your business is a cash suck, meaning you buy a lot of inventory, even though you may be profitable on paper, your accountant says, oh, your EBITDA margin is 12% at the end of the year. Well, that's great, but you're constantly having to borrow money. You're constantly having to inject money because you buy a lot of inventory or you buy a lot of machinery. You've got a negative cash flow cycle. And when a buyer looks at your business, they're going to say, man, the company looks decent on paper. They're making 12 points, but we're going to have to inject a ton of money to buy more equipment, to buy more inventory, et cetera. So all of that money, if you think about it, the money they're using comes from the same place they're using to buy your business. It's all the same wallet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the more money that they have to inject into working capital, the less money they're willing to buy your business. Likewise, the inverse is also true. If they look at your business and say, these guys are just cash spigot, like they're just throwing off cash, they don't need any working capital. In fact, we're just going to start generating cash the moment we own the business, then they're willing to pay you a higher multiple because they don't have to, for a buyer, for a lot of buyers, private equity, VC, like a lot of professional buyers in particular, and corporate buyers for that matter, and I guess individuals to some extent. I mean, for them, it's a return on investment game, right? Like I'm going to invest X dollars, and 5-7 years down the road, I'm going to get 3X, 5X, 10X, whatever the number is. And so investing X dollars is not only buying your business, but also injecting working capital into it.
Well, because if it's $1 million revolving line of credit, that's $1 million they can't do with something else, and it comes with a lot of headaches. I mean, I'm specifically from our story. I mean, we used to buy a ton of stuff. I mean, like lots and lots of it, and then all of us. And I always joke around in my keynote, like we were the bank for everybody else. So it's like, well, no one enjoys that, and the owners don't enjoy that. So there's things like we've talked about where go ask your customers for a credit card up front. You split the fees, do these different things instead of giving certain amount of terms. I mean, there's certain things that you can do to I don't know if you've got any other ideas off the top of your head or any of the podcasts you've done to reduce that working capital.
Yeah, I mean, all the things that you learn about in business school. So basically, cash flow is money coming in, money going out. So I'd think about it in that context. So money coming in. How do I increase the speed and proportion of money coming in? So if you're charging if you're a custom jobs group and you're charging 10% of a deposit, could you charge 15 or 20 or 25? And not really affect your business. So that's number one, money coming in, like deposits, taking credit cards, accelerating the speed with which you charge for your services, et cetera. Money going out is the other side of the equation. So clearly, if you've got great suppliers and you're paying them in 30 days, and you're a good customer, if you have a conversation with the supplier, say, look, would you mind if we move from 30 to 45 days? A lot of people wouldn't necessarily blink an eye at that, especially if you're a good customer. I mean, there's a great famous, I don't know if you've ever read this, Ryan, but the Dell case study from Kevin Rollins, when I think it was an HBR case study, he talked about how they basically took Dell, the computer company, from a negative cash flow cycle to a positive cash flow cycle. This is going back a decade or two. It's a really interesting case study, but it's these things have a cumulative effect. So one tactic, like going from a 10% deposit to 50%, isn't necessarily going to make a huge difference. But it's when you start stacking these little changes on themselves, do they collectively have the ability to turn a negative cash flow cycle into a positive one.
Well, and yeah, I think the moral of that story is, it's not a big deal, and you do these little things. It's worth asking the questions and picking up the phone and doing this little bit of hard lifting, because you might get more money for your company. I mean, like, that's the reality of it. So it's worth it. There's a significant rate of return on asking your customer for a different situation.
That's the cool thing about what we do, and I say we as in you and me, is helping business owners improve their value. Like, it's one thing to help someone improve their profitability, and it's a great thing. But if you help someone improve their value, it's, if they're getting a 5x multiple for their company, you're having like a huge impact on the overall value that they're deriving for their life. So a small tweak, like we're talking about today, it might make you slightly more profitable at the end of the day, certainly help your cash flow. But man, it can have a profound impact on your paycheck at the end of the run.
So then that leads in a perfect lead into, because I think one of the hardest things is that out of and this is just my random opinion, but out of all the different 8 key drivers, a lot of them are, when you kind of dive into them, they make some serious sense. And then you're like, okay, that makes sense. And there's kind of some applicable ways to do that. But reoccurring revenue is something that I always say that everybody wants it. Everybody knows they need it, but they always say, well, not my industry, or all these different excuses. But it's one of those things that I believe it's one of the big needle movers, which is why and we're in the subscription economy, right? Where obviously a lot of these companies are doing that for a reason. So can you, you've got the whole book on it, on automatic customer, but you've got a couple different categories of the recurring revenue, but what would you say to someone that had maybe those excuses?
Yeah, that's funny. I was doing a talk last week or 2 weeks ago down in New Orleans for the The home remodelers. So home remodelers are guys who basically put kitchens on and renovations, and you want someone to like, dig out your basement. They're like they basically do additions for residential real estate. There was like 600 guys in the audience, and most of them were guys, by the way. So it's like
it actually works, right?
yeah, it's a pretty funny thing. And I start getting on my high horse about recurring revenue, and some guy gets in the audience and said, "This would never work in our industry." So um, I hear you, and I think you're right. There are some industries where it's much more difficult than others. And it may require a fairly strong stomach and a lateral view of your business. So let me give you an example. Car washes, as an example. Car washes are one of those businesses that are around for whatever, 50, 60 years. They've always been the same. You buy the soap, you buy the land, and then you send cars through at $5, $10 a pop, and Bob's your uncle. You make great money in June and March if you're in the Northeast, and April when there's salt that needs to get off the cars. And then you die in November. And at the end of the year, you do a decent, like you do reasonably well. Well, a little while ago, some innovative pioneering car washes said, well, why don't we think about doing this as an all you can eat kind of subscription model? Why don't we say to people, look, we'll charge you 10 or 20 bucks a month, and you can come in as many times as you want. Doesn't matter.
I've got one of those.
Yeah.
I'm a member.
Yeah. And so everybody in the car wash, like the old school guys in the car wash industry go, that would never work. It costs us $1 every time someone goes through a car wash. We could never make the economics work. The reality is we've got better things to do than sit in a car wash, right? So most of us, while you might subscribe to an unlimited car wash and go a couple times a month in the beginning, most of us don't go that often, right? We just got better things.
I've got the kids. I've got Cheerios in my car every day.
Oh, okay. Maybe you're the one guy.
They lose money. I'm the one guy that's actually costing them money.
So this sort of unlimited car wash has become a big thing. So now Mr. Car Wash is one of the big roll-up, private equity-backed roll-up guys in the car wash space. I think they've got 150 stores. Now they offer the unlimited car wash. And that's really revolutionizing the car wash business. And it's changing their valuation multiples. Now, car washes will trade at multiples of revenue as opposed to multiples of EBITDA as a result of the fact that they've got this recurring revenue. And so, we see it in a variety of different industries. H. Bloom is a flower store that sells flowers on subscription. So they target hotels. So one of the things that I would do if you're listening to this and you go, yeah, it would never work in my industry, is ask yourself, who is the customer that buys what you sell at a regular cadence? In H. Bloom's case, the flower guys, it wasn't the guy who buys flowers for Valentine's Day once a year. It was the hotels and the spa owners that wanted the fresh cut flowers on the reception table. Those were the buyers who bought flowers regularly. In the case of the car wash folks, it's a different segment. I can't remember exactly. It depends on the type of part of the country you're in. But ask yourself, who buys what you sell and has a need for it on a regular cadence? In the case of the home remodelers, it may not actually be the homeowners themselves. It may be the contractors, the trade. So if you have roof tiles, as an example, let's say you put on new roofs, it may not be the homeowners that need a roof every 25 years. It may be the installers that install roofs that you could put on a subscription basis. So again, think about who is it that buys what you sell on a regular cadence, and it may not be 100% of your customers. There may be a small segment, and that's where you might find the raw material for a subscription.
And I got an interesting, funny story about this. So I got a client, which is in the wedding dress industry. So who regularly buys wedding dresses? On an ongoing basis.
Is this like a skill testing question? Am I supposed to say Kardashian?
I'm literally serious. Like, it's kind of funny because because they were a client of mine, when we were sitting down and going over this, we're like, should we give an award for the person that buys the most amount of wedding dresses from you?
Yeah. Frequent buyers club.
Yeah, not something. It's going to be more expensive than the perks of the wedding dresses. But and on actually serious note, they're diversified. I mean, because they're really good at fitting and drop shipping dresses. So, I mean, I think to your point, it's thinking about it in more of the, what are your core skill sets? And they're launching new products like facial cream and stuff like that. So, because there's a lot of stuff that people buy in that one event, but they're expanding and so they can have subscriptions on facial cream. So they've got this triggering event of the wedding, but then there's other things that they can do for that client who's
perfect.
in perpetuity, right? So, I mean,
Yeah.
it is kind of a joke because we actually laughed about it. We're like, this is not the ideal industry to look for that specific target.
Yeah, my wife's wedding dress is like on a shelving unit in our garage, right? And she's worn it once, and it's been there for 20 years. And I would love to get it out of her garage. I don't want to sell it. She doesn't want to throw it away. So could they store the wedding dresses? Uh, you know what I mean? For
Ooh,
like
yeah, yeah.
$6 a month, we'll store your wedding dress. Now, you might say, like, why would you want it? Why would you care about $6 a month when you're charging like 2, 3, 4 grand for a wedding dress? The one secret to recurring revenue that I think is so overlooked in many cases is that the act of having a subscription makes you infinitely more likely to buy other stuff from that company. So the classic example of that would be Amazon Prime, right? So if you look at what the typical average Amazon customer spends a year with Amazon and compare it to the average Amazon Prime subscriber, it's like 3x. The Prime subscriber spends like 3 times more than the average Amazon customer. And part of that's free shipping, but part of it is the fact that you, as a Prime subscriber, have given Amazon your credit card. You've given them permission to email you. They have a relationship with you. And so when you think about, oh, maybe I want to buy dog food today, whether or not you have a subscription to dog food is kind of out of the point. Because you're a Prime subscriber, they're the first place you go. And we see that in virtually every industry. And to go back to car washes, if you're a car wash subscriber, guess what you're more likely to buy? Your windscreen wipers from that car wash, because you're in there every day. They've got a relationship with you. You know the guys. They're part of your sort of routine. And so you're much more likely to buy other stuff from the companies that you subscribe to.
Which, by the way, is very interesting because that also opens up to kind of tie it to the eventual exit, whenever how that ever looks for the owner. Is now think about those different companies that you could strategically layer on. So maybe an auto body, or you could sell to a product. I mean, like, so there's other people that you could potentially buy, but other companies that you could potentially sell to because of the platform that you built.
Right. To go back to the wedding dress, like, it's one thing to have a wedding dress company, right? It's another thing to say, yeah, we make wedding dresses and we have 14,000 women who pay us $4 a month to store their wedding dresses. And all of those women need other services, right? So they're all married. So there's a, or they're mostly married likely. So there's a whole list of additional products they probably need, right? And so an acquirer looking at that business would say, wow, I'd love to get a hold of that list of 14,000 women who store their wedding dresses for you. So again, it has lots of different knock-on effects.
We're going to give you credit when we go back to this client. And then
if it doesn't work, say, I don't know, some guy in Toronto.
No, this guy has read all of your stuff. He is always referencing Alex from Built to Sell, and so
cool.
Actually, who I'm thinking of is Norm Brodsky, and actually storing all this stuff and like
right.
be in the storage business.
Yeah, Norm, the famous columnist for Inc. magazine, and his work. Yeah, he's great.
So, John, and I know we're short on time here, but, when we think about, so the listeners who have been following my podcast, we get into some of the technical stuff more so than yours. And we get, all the kind of this all around advice. And we're in the last couple episodes have been about the valuation and diving into EBITDA and add backs and transferable, cash flow. What are some of the things to practical ways that you'd say, okay, here's the things that you should focus on. If you get time, because I think I go back to if they've done some of these things where they've sat down with their CPA or certified valuation, there's a lot of technical stuff. How would you, so if you got like a low score on one of these, how do you determine how much time and money you should be spending at these and how to actually get that rate? How are you getting that rate of return or your rate on effort, or how are you quantifying what you're actually getting?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first place to start is monopoly control. And so monopoly control, again, it's inspired by Warren Buffett's the comment he's made many times, which is he invests in companies with a deep and wide competitive moat. And the reason for that is when you have a competitive position that's unique, it gives you pricing authority, meaning just to some extent, you can control your pricing. You can charge better margins. When you've got better margins, you get more market, you got more money to invest in marketing, and more marketing dollars means you can further differentiate your product or service. And then it creates this kind of triggering domino effect. And so monopoly control is about having one thing that really makes you unique and that you do better than anybody else. And that one thing could be, it largely should be your product. And I think the biggest disservice done to the business owner community is telling them, or that old sort of folklore that it's 5 times or 10 times easier to cross sell a second product to an existing customer than it would be to go find a new customer. And while I agree in sales lingo that I'm sure it is better to cross sell and cheaper and easier to cross sell, it doesn't make your business more valuable, because the services that we typically cross sell are not ones we're differentiated on. It's just a habit of, it's a sale of convenience for the buyer. And so when an acquirer looks at your company, they're going to look at it and say, there's this great company here, but we've also got to buy all these other little services on which we already compete. We've got a better product for. We're not interested in being in that business, et cetera. And I'm reminded of a podcast I did with a guy who created an ice cream store, an ice cream brand. And so he always wanted, so he made his own ice cream. He also always kind of liked the idea of having retail stores. So he vertically integrated and created a network of like 60 retail stores where he sold his ice cream. He also sold his ice cream in Kruger's and some of the big department stores in the United States. And he went to sell the company and nobody wanted to buy it because they all looked at it and said, I like part of your business. Like, I like the distribution part, but I don't like the retail part. I like the retail part, but I don't like the manufacturing part. And eventually, he ultimately sold his business for a relatively low multiple. And the moment the acquirer bought the business, they shut down all 60 stores.
Oh
and
my
like,
gosh.
we have no interest. And this was like his hugely part of who he was as a person, right? His identifying, community and so forth. And they said, no, we have no interest in being a retail business. We want to do a business because we want to get our product into Kruger's or Kroger's or whatever the name is.
Yep.
And we wanted to use your product as sort of a Trojan horse to get us in there. So, the long and the short of it is, I think what you want to do is figure out what one thing you are better than anybody else in the world at doing and stick to your knitting. I think it's going to drive a much better multiple at the end of the day. And yes, it's more difficult, and it's more difficult to sell your customers, and it's more difficult to grow. But man, when you go to buy your business, it's like we all buy, I don't know, increasingly we're not buying, but you remember when you buy cable television, and you get ESPN, you get whatever, CNN, Fox, whatever you're into, but then you get the other 198 channels that you have never watch, and you end up having to buy them in the subscription, and you're like, it leaves the buyer with a state of remorse. And the same thing is true of a company. If you have a hodgepodge of services, one of which is really cool and the others are just Me Too products, it really is a huge turnoff for buyers.
And now, obviously, which I think you had some very good points here, but you have to have a lens, and I don't know how you would maybe articulate this, but with that within the reoccurring revenue lens and these other lenses where, you're trying to accomplish some of them all at the same time, right? Where like it might be a different product or service, or maybe just how you're re-engineering what you're offering. Like you said, so storage versus, wedding dresses, right? So, I mean, obviously you have to put some common sense approach to what you're saying, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a practical sense. And with monopoly control, in particular, like if you have 12 different products and services, let's just say, one or two of them are really highly differentiated and the rest are kind of Me Too products. I'm not suggesting that you go out and drop all the other 10 products overnight. I'm saying that you're going to get a material improvement in both your quality of life as an entrepreneur, as well as ultimately the value of your business, if you start with the product and service that is the least differentiated, and say, should we really be in this business? And then work up from there. Get rid of one a year. So don't rip the Band-Aid off and get rid of all 10. Work slowly up the ladder so that over time, you're really competing in markets in which you're truly differentiated.
Well, I think what you said is common from my old industry. I mean, like we sold copiers, software, managed IT services, computer hardware, you sit there and you go, what the heck are we doing? And I always go back to everybody was like, everybody was always talking about all the next things that you should sell. And then there's this one guy locally who's got this very large company. He only sold copiers and the guy just kills it. It's like, he just prints money. And I think it's challenging because, entrepreneurs are flashy object individuals, so they're always talking about how would you, any word of advice for the entrepreneur who's always chasing the next thing?
Oh man, it reminds me of Elon Musk. I mean, he's the Steve Jobs of our generation for sure. And I mean, who am I to criticize what he's created? He's incredible. But man, talk about talk about different businesses. You got SpaceX, the Boring Company, of course, Tesla. I mean, I think taking a page out of Elon Musk's book, at least he's differentiating the companies. He's not, he's been relatively pure on SpaceX. He's starting to differentiate or sort of get more into other products with Tesla, because he's obviously got 3 or 4 products, the car company, but he's also now gone into solar energy. So look, I'm not one to criticize Musk, certainly for what he's created, but I think branding the businesses differently, if you're trying to create,
it gives you options to divest of them. You know what I mean?
Musk can obviously sell SpaceX. I mean, they're totally separate capital structures. They're in no way, they're not related, other than having similar shareholders.
I know we got to run, so I'm got to be conscious of your time. So, but if you were to summarize or highlight one of the things that we've talked about, or if we missed something that you always want to leave the business owners with, what would it be?
It's really where we started the conversation, Ryan, which is for your business to be valuable, it needs to run without you. And there's a whole bunch of different things. In fact, there are 8 unique things you can do to make it so that it's less dependent on you. And that gives you lots of control. It gives you a better multiple if you ever want to sell, but it also gives you a lot more control of your time and a business that you're really kind of overseeing, as opposed to fighting fires with. So I think it's worth doing if you can.
And best way to get in touch with you, if the listeners wanted to, what would it be?
So probably just on Twitter at John Warrillow, WARRILLOW. Try saying that a couple times fast.
Yeah, right. No thanks. Hey, I actually had a blast doing this again. I'm glad we coordinated a time to get you back on the show.
Awesome. Me too. Thanks, Ryan.
See you, John.